Both the prophet Malachi and Jesus himself come down pretty hard on the religious leaders at the time. Prophet Malachi said stuff like, you yourself have turned aside from the way, and because of that you have led others astray. Jesus says things like, you preach but don't practice. You lay heavy burdens on people, but you don't lift a finger to help them. You do everything to be noticed, like wearing tassels and wonderful garments, and put those phylacteries, which was a kind of like a leather box that they would tie to their head, filled with scriptures. And then the bigger the box, they think the holier they were, so they wore bigger ones. And Jesus says it's all for show. You have a position of leadership, and you've betrayed the trust that was put to you in that position. Thinking about that, people who have taken those positions of leadership, and not only in the church but in the world, and they use it for their own gain and their own comfort, we can add today our own list of leaders. Maybe some in the church, some in government, politicians who have done the same thing. They seem that they're there for themselves rather than the people that they promised to serve, betrayed the trust. However, they're not here today, are they? These scriptures are read to us today because they include us as well, as followers of Christ. And we are to be authentic people in following Christ and serving others as Christ served them. Not kind of like something that happened at a small college campus where it was a parents' weekend. They usually have that annually. And a tavern where the students frequented quite often. They put an ad in the newspaper that says, bring your parents for lunch on Saturday. We'll pretend we don't know you. So the chaplain saw that, the college chaplain did, so he put an ad in that says, bring your parents to church on Sunday and we will pretend that we do know you. The problem with all that is, of course, is that with Jesus, there's no pretending. We are or we aren't. So most of us are somewhere in between, but we're not called to pretend. We're called to follow him, and to follow him authentically and faithfully so it can be seen in our lives. More like this, also about a college thing, but a guy's reflecting back on his college. His name is Dr. Ed Young. He talks about a friend that he had when he was a young man. The friend's name was Walter, and Walter was an atheist. He was a good guy, says Ed, but he was an atheist. So one Sunday afternoon, Walter looked at Ed and said, Eddie, do you believe there's a God? Ed said, sure, Walter, I believe there's a God. Walter said, well, you don't live like it. Ed said, well, what do you mean? Walter said, you live just like I do. I'm an atheist. I don't believe there's a God, and I live like there isn't a God. We're buddies. You do everything I do. You say there is a God, yet you don't live like there's a God? Don't you have enough sense to know that if there is a God, if you can get to know him and live the way he wants you to live, that's the most important thing in life? Ed said, that was the greatest sermon I ever heard. God used the mouth of an atheist. I'll never forget it. I couldn't answer him. I went to my room, dropped down on my knees and said, Lord, I know you're there. I believe Jesus is your son. I've gotten away from that, away from my background when I was away from home. Just lead me. I'm yours. As we follow Christ, is there not a need to be transformed inside? That the transformation happens as we begin to see the contradiction that there is in us in the ways that we're supposed to be following Christ, and then We are awakened by somebody like Walter the atheist or something else. Someone calls us to task and says, would Christ do that? We're called to have that transformation inside where we begin to see things differently, and because of that, let ourselves be changed and do and say things differently. The transformation makes us authentic. And it teaches us to do things the opposite of what Jesus says in the gospel. You preach but don't practice. It teaches us to preach and to practice. In other words, to do what we know to be right according to Christ, not according to anything else. And I notice even at my age how affected I am by the good example of somebody else. Of many people in this parish that I've come to know who speak about their prayer life or their faith. And when they make choices like that and they share that with me, it's like, I need to hear that. That's encouraging. The strong faith they have. That good example, which we are all called to give. But sometimes I think we don't. I was going to say that it's a good thing that we adults aren't affected by peer pressure anymore, right? Of course we are. We're in a group of gossiping people. Well, why not? Do we ever eat too much or drink too much because it's expected of us? Maybe we act badly towards others because everybody else is. We're supposed to practice what we believe, what we preach. And when we do, it's a powerful example that has effect in the lives of other people. We become more authentic people. Jesus says you lay heavy burdens on people, but don't lift a finger to help them. We are there to help relieve the burden of people. We can talk about many things that burden people. Talk about one. Loneliness can burden people. Not being included, not being recognized, not being heard is a burden that many people carry. How can we walk beside them? How can we walk with them so that burden does not wear them down? And the last part about drawing all attention to oneself. I guess we all tend to do that. We all like to look good, and we're just like, oh, right. But what a wonderful thing it is to build somebody else up, to compliment somebody else, to encourage somebody else. Does anybody in here not know someone who could use a word of encouragement? No. In fact, we might admit ourselves we need words of encouragement to build people up, not to take the praise for ourselves. And what's good about that are many things, but one thing that's good about it is it's something that nobody can take away from us. The greatest among you is the one who serves the rest. You know that those football players who go into the end zone with the football and then they go, yeah, I like it when a guy goes in and goes. Because my question is, when he goes into the end zone, it's all great. People applaud. What happens when he fumbles the ball? Is he nothing then? What happens when he can't play anymore? There is no one who even recognizes him on the street. Who is he? That's the problem, one of the problems of trying to draw the attention to oneself. You want to be the greatest? Jesus has no problem with that. You want to be the greatest? Serve the rest. How can we be of service to others? And you know what? When we see it, we know it. There's a story I read, true so far as I know, about some centuries ago before they had the internet and telephones or even telegraphs. But there was this monk who was appointed to be the abbot of a distant monastery. So he went there. They didn't know he was coming. They didn't know who the guy was, but they went there and says, I've been assigned to this monastery. And they looked at him and said, well, sure, come on, we got some stuff for you to do. So they put him into the kitchen where he scrubbed pots and pans and he mopped the floor and he peeled potatoes and did stuff like that, all the menial kinds of things. Well, several weeks later, the bishop comes to install this monk as the abbot. Well, they said, well, where's the monk I'm supposed to install as abbot? And they said, well, we don't know anything about that. So he went searching around the monastery and found him, of course, in the kitchen making supper. He said, come here. What are you doing here? So he brought him before the people. They all assembled, and he installed him as the abbot. And his witness there was powerful and affected the future of that monastery for many years. He came there to serve, and he did. That's what we're all called to do, to be of service to one another. Because when we are of service to one another, we are of service to Christ, the one we follow, who leads us to God the Father.